Vous m'écoutez? La réunion est diffusée maintenant. Ah d'accord, donc on va voir sur...
Ok. On vous entend? Vous nous entendez? Mais qui est-ce qui parle là? Parce que là, le micro n'est pas allumé non plus. Oui. Non, c'est pas.
La voz de Zapata Oliveira.
Bon, bonjour, buenos dias. Est-ce que vous m'entendez? Guten Tag, alles gut, alles klar? Non, moi j'entends rien. Si vous allumez votre micro, c'est mieux. J'entends rien là. Peut-être que je vais mettre la vidéo. Ah, ça,
Ok, est-ce que vous nous entendez mieux maintenant?
là, je vous entends très bien.
Ok, parfait. Donc, on fait comme ça.
D'accord, très bien. Donc,
Non,
oula,
là,
j'ai un petit problème avec l'ordinateur.
Ouais. Ok, donc normalement, c'est la salle entière. Bienvenue. Et donc, voilà.
Könnt ihr noch eine Raumkamera machen?
Oui. Ouais, comme ça. Et puis, mais je ne sais pas si vous avez. Ok, parfait. Ok.
Là, je vais passer un coup de fil à Théo.
Okay. Merci beaucoup. Ok.
Alors,
Donc, le grand moment est venu. Bienvenue à tout le monde. Welcome to you all. Benvenuto a todos. Et non, bienvenuto. C'est trop compliqué pour moi. But you see already the challenge we have, the different languages, and I won't, I might say raison. I'm not able to do it in one of or other languages. Okay, but for this introduction, I stick to English as it is hopefully a language that everyone understands, even if most of us don't speak it the best way. Okay, but that is the kind of improvisation we always have with this transatlantic dialogues. And you have to find ways to get into dialogue. Okay, at the moment, I will just officially open this event as I'm the director of the Interdisciplinary Center for Global South Studies, which encourages this type of events. I have to thank all those who have contributed to organize this event. Mostly, Edivaldo Gonzalez came up with the idea, and Louis Nana, who joined in happily, and so they formed the most important part of the organizing team. I think also my colleague Sebastian Thies, who accepted to co-organize this. We thank all those who are outside the room and have contributed to the organization of the logistics. We thank all the colleagues and partners and Sami Chak, who have accepted with relatively short notice to come to this event and have traveled long ways from, well, Paris is not that far, but from Abidjan, from Dakar, from Niterói in Brazil, and even from Mexico City to join us here and to have a really transatlantic dialogue. And last but not least, I would like to thank the Centre des Mondes Francophones. I don't know whether they have an English name, the Center for Francophone Worlds, would you say? Who has co-financed this event, and the BRANAT, the Center for Brazilian and Latin American Studies, who also are funding this event and inviting us to their summer party tomorrow night. And I would like to hand over to Esteban Moreira, who is the representative of the center today, and will have some words and might explain us what about this end in Brazil and Latin America. Moreira.
Okay, thank you very much. As you know,
Muss man den sehen?
much to say, but thank you very much. We are very happy to contribute to this
So,
to contribute to this work with Interdisciplinary Center for Global South Studies. And as you know, we are in charge to support the cooperation between Unity and Latin American countries, but it's better when we think in a longer frame like Global South. And yes, I'm some for both parts. I'm PhD from, or I will be from ICSS, and on this case, it's very difficult for me to speak as a outsider. I'm a part of this center. Okay, and thank you very much for the invitation to participate in your initiative.
So we'll hand over to the two of you.
Okay, well, okay. Good afternoon to all of you, and thank you very much, Susanne Romeru and Professor Sebastian Thies, for all the support. Well, first of all, I would like to thank all the professors for the friendship in the elaboration of this event and for representing the gateway to Africa. Obviously, I refer to Louis Nana. We also thank each of you for making this meeting a truly transatlantic dialogue. And well, I would like to thank the professor from Brazil, Mexico, and Senegal, and the Ivory Coast. Thank you very much. And also to an Africanist and an Latin Americanist, Dr. Nicolas Elo, and Anne Tomaszewski. And that's all. Thank you so much for being here.
So, should I continue in English or a little bit in French? So, maybe you would you like to do it in Spanish first?
No, I think that it's better for this opportunity to walk in.
Okay, so I would like to introduce the second language of the symposium, so French. Je voudrais dire merci à vous tous qui êtes là ce soir. Et parce que le colloque, c'est une idée, c'est un projet, mais quand il devient une réalité, c'est une grande joie. Et nous vous souhaitons la bienvenue à Tübingen pour ceux qui arrivent à Tübingen pour la première fois. Nos collègues qui viennent du Sénégal et d'Abidjan, qui ont répondu spontanément à l'invitation. Nous vous sommes très reconnaissants d'avoir accepté l'invitation, surtout que vous avez une grande expérience dans le domaine des relations entre l'Amérique latine et l'Afrique. Donc, merci infiniment. Merci aussi à notre collègue, d'abord à notre collègue Edivaldo, qui a eu l'idée et qui a eu la gentillesse de m'associer et d'associer le professeur Ouégou et le professeur Tis à l'idée. Merci évidemment à nos collègues qui viennent du Mexique et du Brésil et aux étudiants du Master Cultures of Global South et du certificat doctoral dans les études du Sud global. Et aujourd'hui aussi, nous avons avec nous l'écrivain Sami Chak, qui So Sami Chak is a writer who I will not say he's obsessed, but who is more and more interested on Latin America, who wrote several novels on this area. And some of them will be discussed during the symposium. And so it's a great honor to have Sami Chak, who will also intervene this night at the ICFA. So you are all welcome to join us tonight. So today we'll be here in this room, but tomorrow we have another room, and we'll let you, we'll guide you through the room. So thank you very much and enjoy the symposium. If you have any question, don't hesitate to contact Edivaldo or I myself or any of the GV or send us an email. Thank you very much.
Maybe one last organizational thing. So the event at the ICFA this night is not the last one, even if it's the last in the program. Afterwards, there's a conference dinner. Please come at least at this, because the event at the ICFA is in French and German. So for those who understand neither French nor German might be a bit difficult, but the conference dinner is in all our languages. And I think in the program you have the party at the Bralat at a 5:15, but it has been delayed. Morera, the party at the Bralat.
Is tomorrow at 6 p.m. In the first floor. This
Okay, 6 p.m.
early shows.
Okay, so there's
Not 5.
yeah.
Not
Yeah.
five.
Not five.
Yeah. Okay.
Okay, so we come to the thematic introduction. Well, and we have written the text because it's in English. This symposium that we are Sebastian, Yeah. There are four of us. And we want to have a dialogue.
This is not even true. He said it would be a competition. So you're the jury.
Okay. So first thing I wanted to say, the symposium that we are so proud to open today is not without precedence in our cooperation with partners in Africa and Latin America. We have in fact organized a couple of transatlantic. We need the PowerPoint. Yes. We have to connect it differently. Okay, sorry, because I wanted to show a slide, but we have to wait a moment. So, well, I showed the slide afterwards. We have in fact organized a couple of transatlantic dialogue initiatives, and we started doing this at the height of the pandemic. I think maybe Renata remembers very well. We had organized in autumn 2020 3 seminars between the universities of Tübingen, Dakar, and Rio de Janeiro in French, Spanish, and Portuguese. And they were held online. Some sessions were shared between 2 or 3 of these seminars to really initiate this dialogue, and happily the Brazilian students knew some French. So, and what is, as we sought to create as much dialogue as possible despite the difficulties of linguistic understanding. You see here the poster for the online roundtable. We organized this opening to these seminars, extending our cooperation to this, the names have disappeared. Okay. Okay, because we, it doesn't matter. So we were extending our cooperation to the United States and Mexico. And it is probably no surprise that the first topic that brought us together was the contested legacy of slavery and the historic sites of the slave trade, inspired by the UNESCO's project. And leading members of that project even joined us in this round table, as Milton Buran from Brazil or Maria Elisa Velázquez from Mexico. This topic has continued to occupy us, and it is a very fortunate constellation today, which also testifies to the growing role of Global South Studies in Tübingen, that Edivaldo González Ramirez and Louis Nana, 2 postdocs of Mexican and Cameroonian origin, are currently affiliated to the University of Tübingen and suggested to us the theme of the present conference. Initially, they had thought of organizing this meeting at Sorbonne University in Paris. And we feel much honor that they finally opted for the University of Tübingen and invited Sebastian Thies and myself to join the organizing committee. We're also delighted to be able to benefit from the Erasmus partnerships with the universities UCAD at Dakar, UFHB at Abidjan, UFI at Niterói, and UNAM in Mexico. This demonstrates certainly the vitality of our relationship and the interest in Global South Studies, which is represented here in Tübingen by the Interdisciplinary Center for Global South Studies. By way of introduction or competition, we have agreed to present 2 perspectives on this theme, one more African and the other more Latin American. Although we had to recognize that we can't entirely separate them. One is guided more by literary perspectives, while the other extends to more encompassing cultural issues, but all are guided by the concern to present some figurations, as we call them, that allow us to approach the theme of our encounter, les rencontres, and dialogue between Latin America and Africa. To begin with, we take a quote from Monet Nimbo's novel Pelourinho, published in 1995, which seems to provide a diagnosis of relations between the two continents. There is a character in the novel who says, Le Brésil et l'Afrique ont tant de choses en commun. Nous sommes comme des jumeaux sur les deux bords de l'océan. Seulement, on ne se fait jamais signe. And the main character, the writer who has come, the African writer who has come to Brazil, is answering, Je suis venu pour cela, pour réparer l'anomalie. But this man, who he feels called upon to rectify this anomaly, pays a high price for this undertaking. He sets out to find cousins in Bahia who, like him, are descendants of the legendary Ndindi Cantourage, who arrived in Brazil centuries ago as a slave. As he is about to meet the cousins, he is killed by the very people he set out to find. Perhaps the tragedy of the story lies not so much in dying at the hands of those you have longed to meet, but in the failure of the two sides to get to know each other, as both sides don't know who they are dealing with. If through our symposium, we certainly hope to contribute to repairing this anomaly, we hope, of course, not to repeat the failure of Monet Nimbo's writer. Okay, but this, why do we start with this? This evidence of failure has led us to look for the opposite. At what point in history was there an encounter and a desire for dialogue between these two areas, linked by history and shared cultural elements, but which do not call out to each other, qui ne se font pas signe. We are well aware that the choice we are presenting is to some extent random, and that it is strongly imbued with the West African French-speaking perspective. We're just highlighting some flash moments that we consider figurations of the relationship between the two continents. So I'll start with the first one, and it is not surprisingly the beginning of the negritude in the 1930s. This movement, which celebrated the common origin, history, and culture of all Black people in the world, was the first figuration of a transatlantic encounter. Aimé Césaire, Léon Gontran Damas, and Léopold Senghor meeting in Paris, that is the place of the colonizing power, brought together not only Martinique, French Guiana, and Senegal, but through the space of the Caribbean, the continents which are linked at it. Because you think of the Caribbean is a region belonging to several continents at a time. Geographically, it's America. Politically, Martinique and Guadeloupe are Europe. And culturally, one might say African or strong African part. So from this space, ideas circulate both in the transatlantic Francophone space and between the Francophone and Spanish-speaking spaces in the Caribbean. For example, Aimé Césaire's Cahiers d'un retour au pays natal, first published in 39 in a French magazine, and no one was really aware of it, was translated and published in Cuba in 1940, several years before being re-edited in France by André Breton. And so ideas were circulating also in this space.
So the second moment occurred after African independence and in the political context of the Cold War. We are referring to the conference organized in Dakar from the 7th to the 12th January 1974 by President Senghor and the Department of Hispano-American Studies at UCAD. So our colleague Jibril Mbai brought us the book. Maybe it's there. We will have to the chance to look at it later. So this event inscribes itself in a twofold process. One political, the other literary, with a view to Senegal, with a view to forming a bloc of non-aligned states which dominated the decolonial period in Africa. Senegal has proposed, after the failure of the Tricontinental in Havana in 1966, which included also some socialist African countries, to include the Latin American states in the G77 at the Algiers conference in 1967. Dakar conference, however, was not a political one, but brought together intellectuals and artists. It thus forms part of a literary figuration, namely the beginnings of boom literature in Latin America, and which was increasingly imposing itself on the world literature markets. For many authors, American writers became models of originality and emancipation to follow, as Thierno Morenembo puts it, in an attitude of admiration with African authors looking to Latin American as example. In an interview, he says in 1998, les Latino-Américains comme Garcia Marquez, Jorge Amado, Asturias Vargas Llosa, Carpentier, Octavio Paz, nous ont également influencés. Je trouve en eux une filiation. Ils nous ont décomplexés, ils nous ont renvoyés à nous-mêmes parce qu'ils ont dit très tôt que la part européenne ne leur suffisait pas, qu'ils étaient à la fois blancs, indiens et noirs. The third moment we would like to mention is the UNESCO Slave Route Project, launched in 1994 and recently converted into the Roots of Enslaved People. The aim of this project was to break the silence surrounding the history of slavery and to inscribe this tragedy in the universal memory. The project is not only helping to set up sites of remembrance on both sides of the Atlantic and create exchanges, it is also leading to a growing interest in the subject on the part of African writers. So there is this novel of Kanye Alem, Les Enfants du Brésil, where he evokes an often forgotten side of the story of slavery, which is, for example, the return of Afro-Brazilian to the African continent. So we end with, yes, before
Continue.
yes, so the Agudas, for example, are still present today in Benin under the name, the Brazilian descendant, Afro-Brazilian are still present today in Benin under the name of the Agudas, and have found themselves not only in marginalized situations, but also in positions of power, such as Silvano Olympio, families, for example, who not only provided Togo's first president, such as after independence, but had already made a significant contribution to the development of the city of Lomé during the colonial era. We would like to end with a quotation from a novel by Samicha, Fille de Mexico, which we read as a kind of response to the evidence of failure made by Tierno Monenembo in our initial quote. Less humble or not complex than Monenembo in his proposal to take Latin American authors as model, Chak seems to us to be proposing, in a certain sense, the fusion between both continents that Monenembo's character Escritore was aiming for. Jibril Nao, the character narrator of this novel, has a dream in which Mexico City and Lomé are so superimposed on each other, and he comments on the appearance of ghosts having sex with the living in a way that, in our view, shows great casualness in relation to the model author. So he wrote, dans ce rêve, je m'étais retrouvé, so we caught the quotation, je m'étais retrouvé soudain à Lomé, où circulaient les mêmes histoires de fantômes. Sur ce plan, Juan Rulfo et Garcia Marquez avaient très peu de choses à m'apprendre. So we see it as someone who says, yes, they are great writers, as he acknowledged, but we know the reality they are talking about also. So we handle to the Latin American side.
You want to stay there?
Yeah.
Maybe. Okay, so this is a competition between the two teams. I didn't know that you would end with the reference to Garcia Marquez, and I didn't plan so, but it is interesting that Zapata Oliveira, an Afro-Colombian author, when he was talking about the Africanness of Garcia Marquez, he said, well, Garcia Marquez only discovered his Africanness when he went to Angola. So he was. It was a process to find the Africanness inside himself. So. So this dialogue between Zapata Oliveira and Garcia Marquez is perhaps an answer to what you said. Edivaldo and I were unsure of how to contribute to this because we said, well, we do not want to write, or we do not want to construct a historical lineage of the important contribution that the African diaspora has had to Latin American identity. So this is called the third route, and we are a bit unsure. No, Africa as the third route of Latin American identity. We are a bit unsure about the organicist metaphor and the myth of the mestizaje and mestizaje that it entails. So when thinking about a model, we decided to take the plateau. This idea of Deleuze, well, it's originally from Bateson. A plateau is a kind of spotlight, a continuous self-vibrating region of intensity whose development avoids any orientation towards a culmination point or external end. And it contains the conflict, but it does not point to a certain telos. And I think this is kind of appropriate to narrate the history of the African diaspora in Latin America, because there is no real pathway to recognition. the contexts are highly diverse, and obviously there is some progress made in some countries, but then you have the opposite in other countries. So it is a struggle. So, and we also, if you think about history as a kind of progress or development, it diminishes the role of those who struggled against slavery at the very beginning, because they are just precursors of something that happens now. So this is why we chose to talk about 4 or 5 plateaus. Right. And just let me name the plateaus so we won't get lost afterwards. It is resistance, emancipation, racialization, articulation, and at the end, we are going to talk about solidarities, but it will just be a very brief outlook.
Exactly. Well, thank you so much, Sebastian. Well, yes. I will read a little text because I think that it's better for all of us. Well, in fact, I would like to start with an act of figurative rebellion. One of that waves together the multiply relationship that have been established between Latin American and African for more than 500 years already, since the arrival of the first ships with slave people in the Caribbean Sea. To do so, we ask you to imagine ourselves on a ship united between walls and waters and wooden floors, instead the glass and the concrete that isolates us in this room. What is left for us then? Cut off from the space that constitute us communities far from the landscapes that taught us to think and feel? To answer this question, in 1996, Edward Glisson proposed to think the ship not only as a vehicle where colonial violence visible in the slave trade was set in motion, but also as a space and a metaphor where practices, languages, and knowledge were first annihilated and then reconfigured. For Glisson, the ship make the language of the slave disappear in the sense of the loss of their sociability. But in a second moment, it produced the creation of a new language, of a new arts and ways for communicating. And this is the set of Edward Glisson. I read in English, but this is the original. For the slave ships, there is the place and time when African language disappeared, because people who spoke the same language were never put together on the slave ship. As they were on the plantation, people found themselves stripped for all sorts of elements of their daily lives, not least their language. What happened to this migrant? It does he or she recompose through traces a language and arts that could be said to be valid for all. Although the challenge to face us are completely different today, we still share the problem that there is not a common language for us to address the enslavement and the many consequences, and it had on the both of parts of the Atlantic. We thus appear to Glisson to expose two central things in our approach to the relationship between Africa and Latin America. One of them, the search for a common language, and the second one, the diversity of experience distributed in the time and space, because just as the experience of Afro descendants is not the same in Brazil and Colombia, the relationship between Africa and Latin America has not been the same in Mexico or Puerto Rico. In order to unite in a conceptual framework the diversity and the searches, we have decided to use four figuration that help us to think about this encounter of, if you will, this creative act that has been sustained through the centuries. Okay? And the first one, Sebastian.
So first, we would like to think about resistance, and choosing a scenario with which to start this plateau. We decided to not to mention Toussaint Louverture's role in the liberation of Haiti from French rule, neither Benko Bioro's establishment of San Basilio Palenque in the first free town in the Spanish colonies. Neither would we like to mention Palmares, and focus instead on one of the first major, albeit unsuccessful, rebellions against the Spanish rule in 1612 in what is now, Mexico City. It's called La Conjura de Negros in historical terms. In 1612, the Spaniards squashed Conjura de Negros, a complot of the black population they saw as a major threat to their rule in New Spain. The Brotherhood associated with one of the Pericles at the time had elected a king and a queen, and supposedly they were set to kill the white population during the Easter procession. By executing and quartering more than 30 supposed insurrectionists, the Spaniards set a tremendous example to quell any kind of resistance in the Mexican highlands at a time when the Mexican population made up about a third part of the colony's total population. So it was much bigger than the white population at the time. The main historian of this event is curiously Canónigo, somebody with a religious post, of indigenous ascent, who was writing at the time what later became known as the Annals. His Annals, written in Nahuatl, the language of the Aztecs. The Annals are a chronicle in the Amerindian tradition of history writing that transports the indigenous perspectives of these events. And it was not destined to be read by the Spanish population. Yeah? He, while showing compassion to the executed negros, slaves, Chimalpain is quick to take the general paranoia, stating that the emancipation of the African enslaved people might well turn into their becoming the masters of the indigenous population. In Núcleo, the scenario shows how the emancipation of enslaved persons met from the very beginnings a kind of social anxiety that is a motor of an ever more elaborate form of governmentality, keeping the African diaspora from political participation. And here you have, well, this is the Spanish, no, this is the English translation from the original Nahuatl, and it says, and that if they had found their masters, the Spaniards, that if they had justly killed them, that immediately they would rule that a Negro was going to become king, and the Moorish mulatto that he would take for a wife was going to become queen. Her name was Isabel, who was going to rule in Mexico and in all towns in all parts of New Spain, that all the blacks had already been given 2 positions that were there where they were going to govern, some for dukes, some for marquises, etc. So it is a whole idea of government that is imagined from his perspective, and obviously the Spaniards had the forced and tortured the enslaved persons to give testimony of what they had planned. So we can assume that at least some of this was going to happen. In 1612, 100 years before San Basilio Palenque, no? So it's okay. This is an abrupt change to our second plateau, emancipation. This is Francia Marquez. You might know her, well, especially those who know Colombia would know that she has become the first Afro-Colombian vice president of the country, I think a year or a year and a half ago. And we chose her because she's from very poor origins, an Afro-Colombian activist who gained a certain international reputation for her ecological activism, and then she rose to prominence during the national strike in Colombia, and there was no way of not including her in the project of government that finally was elected. And this is the moment when she would occupy the residency of the vice presidents. And this is her predecessor, and Francia Marquez directly went to the people in charge of the domestic service, and they gave them a handshake. And the commentary at the time was, it is the pedagogy of the handshake, because her predecessor was caught in this unfortunate photo, which went completely viral because she just couldn't believe her to do this handshake, to address the servants, the workers of domestic service at the time. And then she said afterwards, instead of apologizing for this mishap, she said this on Twitter, which was a complete disaster. Sembrar odio es el deporte preferido de algunos. To produce hate is the favorite sport of some reporters. My charge is to work with love for Colombia and those who work with me. The new vice president will have the opportunity to know better each one of the niñas. Niñas is a complete infantilization of the people who work for you. Niñas is les filles.
Muchachas in Mexico.
Muchacha, ¿no? So, las niñas que nos acompañan en la oficina, who accompany us in the office, and to embrace them, how in a way I did a lot of times. This is just what we wanted to show is that emancipation. Well, obviously, the case of Francia Marquez is exceptional. Yeah, there are very few Afro members of the African diaspora who've risen to power. One actually became a president in Mexico in the early 19th century, Vicente Guerrero, the son of a female slave. But the elites are very cautious to open up. And so they react in this kind of telling way, and this is what we wanted to show.
Yeah, exactly. Thank you, Sebastian. And there is another example of the structural violence against the African American, African Mexicans. And it's an example very interesting because it's about the president of Mexico, Vicente Fox Quesada, who say los mexicanos hacen el trabajo que ni los negros quieren hacer. Something like the Mexican do the work that even the black people don't want to do. So that's the reason there is an event very strange in the politics in Mexico. And well, I waste so much time to write this text, so I'm so sorry, but I will read. I'm sorry. Okay, to address dynamics of racialization, we chose the example of the Mexican president Vicente Fox, who caused a major confrontation with Afro-American intellectuals over the role of racism against Black people in Mexico. The scandal was caused by a brief comment saying in the USA, Mexicans did the jobs that even Blacks did not want to do. This led to a huge debate in the year in which, for continent reasons, the Mexican Post Office had issued a postal stamp with one highly popular ape-like cartoon character, the Afro-Mexican Memín Penguin is this one. Memín Penguin is one of the best-selling cartoons in Mexico since the 50s, and it's well known in popular culture. For this reason, President Vicente Fox was eager to defend it as an example, an expression of traditional popular culture, even diving deeper into the discursive dispositive that Mexico is not a racist country, and obviously it's a mistake. Mexico is a racist country. Well, and the expression the Vicente Fox it's clear to demonstrate that. So, okay, we have another our tier plateau that it's about the voice and articulation of another expression of resistance. Well, I don't know if you, Sebastian, want to say something, or
Yep.
I can explain it if you prefer.
So the idea was that we wanted to. There has been a lot of talk about might unite Africa and Latin America. And there's one quote I think Susanne left out of the introduction, that was a Brazilian author telling Mona Nembo that the only thing that really unites Latin America and Africa is food and music, I think. So leaving out completely the intellectual production of the African diaspora. So we wanted to to highlight that one of the plateaus one has to address has to do with voicing, articulating, and creating some kind of emancipation. And we start with, or basically the author we picked is Juan Francisco Manzano, who was an enslaved person in 19th century Cuba. At the time, Cuba was one of the very few colonies left in the Spanish rule. So the rest of Latin America had already abolished slavery, and it was when particularly the British was pressing abolition. So you had an Englishman who came by to Cuba, and he found that there was a small kind of intellectual group, una tertulia, who united in La Habana, and that there was a poet of African descent that participated in it, and they actually collected some money to buy his freedom from slavery. And this is Juan Francisco Manzano. So the Englishman Madden, he said it would be good to have his slave narrative, and so it is in a certain way it is a slave narrative. It's basically the only real slave narrative in the 19th century from Spanish rule, but it is a poet. It is not, and it is a poet with the voice of a poet and the self-conscious of a poet. So he takes this idea of writing his autobiography to write about his becoming a poet. And so because we wanted to include an African voice from the very beginnings of the Afro-Latin American culture, we picked one of his with poems. So I think you just read it in Spanish, and I'll do the translation.
Okay. Cuando miro el espacio que he corrido desde la cuna hasta el presente día, tiemblo y saludo a la fortuna mía, más de terror que de atención movido. Sorpréndeme la lucha que he podido sostener contra la suerte tan impía. Si tal llamase puede la porfía de mi infeliz ser al mal nacido. 30 años que en gemidor estado, triste infortunio por doquier me asalta. Nada más es para mí la cruda guerra, que en vano suspira he soportado, si la comparo, oh Dios, con lo que falta.
So, as you might recognize, this is he adapts the traditional Spanish form of poetry at the time, and he talks about the way he has left behind, and thinking about the hardships he had to endure. He only he only can think about what is still ahead of him in terms of si la comparo con lo que falta, yeah, what he's very much afraid of what still awaits him. So this was not a really good translation, but it was. So, and this is yesterday. No, this is yesterday, and we just wanted to end with that. This is Haiti, and as you might recognize, this is the first of the 400 Kenyan soldiers that Kenya sent as an act of solidarity to re-establish governmental rule in Haiti. Haiti, the kind of Puna, the birth of African emancipation in the Americas. So this is. So we thought how to deal with that, because obviously we don't know what will happen to them. We don't know what kind of things they will be involved in, because the situation in Haiti is really difficult. But it is interesting that it is Kenya and not one of the Latin American countries that is sending help. Yeah. So Haiti has been left alone with this problem. And it is the kind of excluded nation in the Latin American and Caribbean context, in a certain sense. And Kenya responds to this earlier moment when Cuba sent the first brigades to Angola. No, so that is. I know that we might not be very fond of military help and things like that, but it is interesting to put these two pictures in relation, because Cuba at the time was the only country, not even the Soviet Union. It was Cuba who said, well, we have to help Angola to struggle with the apartheid regime in the south. And the Soviet Union didn't want to get into that. And it led to a lot of interesting dialogue, among it Garcia Marquez discovering his Africanness. And we don't know what this will lead to. Okay, so this is it basically. Exactly. Thank you very much.
Yeah, this is Ivan.
Bonjour, vous m'entendez?
Oui, oui.
Est-ce que vous m'entendez? Edivaldo, vous m'entendez?
Oui, je vous entends. Okay. No.
Bonjour, vous m'entendez?
Ok, on va continuer avec la deuxième partie du programme. En cette occasion, nous avons la participation de Monsieur Ramos Izquierdo, qui est professeur
Est-ce
de
que
la...
vous m'entendez, Edivaldo, s'il vous plaît?
Oui.
Oui, parce que je voudrais vous dire
bien.
quelque chose d'important.
Ah oui, si vous voulez.
Oui, c'est-à-dire, si vous me donnez 2 minutes, est-ce que là,
parfait.
vous m'entendez? Laissez-moi parler un tout petit peu, parce que je vous ai envoyé à plusieurs reprises, je voulais vous informer que M. Kouy, qui est à Abidjan, a des problèmes de connexion depuis une bonne demi-heure. Et donc, il ne peut pas participer pour l'instant. Est-ce que vous pouvez faire quelque chose pour qu'il puisse c'est
Euh,
connecté ou pas?
Bueno, yo sé paso, peut-être on peut avoir la troisième participation de Monsieur euh, Nicolas, mais je ne suis pas sûr parce qu'on peut attendre peut-être quelques minutes, tout le monde, peut-être 10 minutes. Ou...
No, me c'est-à-dire, a ver, voy a hablar en español, Edivaldo, quizás así es
Sí,
más fácil
lo que le
que nos
dije es
entendamos. ¿Me
sí,
oyen? Bueno, sí.
que solo podemos esperar
Le
10
mandé
minutos.
al señor Ties, al profesor, un mensaje diciendo que te estoy llamando desde hace media hora por WhatsApp y no he podido hablar contigo para informarte que el profesor Cui ha hecho todo lo posible por conectarse desde Abidjan, pero no es posible, no ha podido conectarse. Entonces, digo, yo veo solamente una solución, un último intento de conexión de la parte del profesor Cuy ahorita, si le pueden ayudar a que se conecte y seguimos con el programa como tal, o
Okay.
si no, digo, visto de que nosotros estábamos programados a las 15:30 y ahorita son las 16:15, 23, es decir, ya deberíamos haber terminado nosotros. Entonces, ¿qué hacemos? Eh, entonces, díganme, por favor. Moi, je le dis en français, si vous
Justo,
comprenez. Monsieur Couy a eu des
sí,
problèmes de
no, está
connexion,
bien.
donc je cherche une solution. Donc, la première solution, c'est que vous aidez Monsieur Couy à se connecter, ou l'autre solution, c'est que, bon, finalement, je peux résumer, disons, l'intervention rapidement en 4 minutes, et puis vous continuez avec votre colloque. Ça vous va? Donc, les deux options.
Je pense que la deuxième option, c'est la meilleure parce que nous n'avons pas le temps suffisant et je pense que
D'accord, très bien. Bon,
que
ce que je vais
monsieur
faire,
Ramos continue. OK.
d'accord. Si vous voulez, je vais
Mhm.
intervenir rapidement et brièvement pour dire ce qu'on allait faire. Et donc là, plus tard, nous, on fera donc une autre intervention, un autre dialogue. Bon, rapidement, je vous félicite pour votre introduction. Bon, enfin, que j'avais pensé que vous alliez être un peu plus court, mais bon, c'est très bien vos plateaux. Mais un petit détail concernant les poèmes de Manzano, parce qu'il manque un vers, il s'agit d'un sonnet, il manque un vers très important qui montre la souffrance de l'esclave. Et je vous conseille la lecture de l'œuvre et les propositions d'un esclave comme le père de la littérature cubaine, de Madame Campuzano, qui est une experte
Mhm.
des études cubaines. Bon, donc je dis simplement que nous, ce qu'on voulait faire,
Mhm.
c'est très simple, je vais simplement l'énoncer, ça va me prendre 4 minutes, et donc la question, c'est que je voulais faire un contrepoint personnel et collectif avec Monsieur Couy, et donc ça, c'était démontrer un premier aspect qui me semble extrêmement important dans les contacts des universitaires et de la culture, que Monsieur Couy, comme moi, nous nous intéressons à l'enseignement et à la recherche et à la production des doctorants. Parce que là, je pense que c'est extrêmement important et nous avons l'expérience déjà des 4 doctorants, dont 2 actuellement qui ont fait la thèse avec nous, travaillent à l'université des Bourcaï en Abidjan. Un aspect essentiel de ça, c'est aussi c'est peut-être ce que j'appelais dans les titres donc de notre dialogue, c'était cette variation, c'est la présence de la France à l'Université de Limoges. Et donc là, c'est les centres de la francophonie. C'est un espace extrêmement important pour tout ce qui est les pays francophones et en particulier, très important, la présence africaine, disons, dans ces projets. C'est dans ces cadres que j'ai eu le plaisir de connaître M. Couy. Nous avons donc eu des collaborations pendant des années et voilà, donc des séminaires, journées, colloques et publications. Nous, on voulait faire un point de vue critique personnel des littératures et cultures des 2 continents, ce qui implique une lecture intellectuelle et une expérience sur les champs. Et en particulier, bon, enfin, je vais énoncer ce que M. Couy allait développer parce qu'on avait travaillé sur ça hier soir et plusieurs jours. Donc, lui, une excellente connaissance de la littérature et de la culture de l'Amérique latine, en particulier du Mexique, à travers de la littérature de sa société. Il a fait une thèse d'État qui n'est pas n'importe quoi, mais disons en France, c'est une thèse de 1000 pages, n'est-ce pas, extrêmement important sur l'œuvre de José Revueltas. Et ça, c'est très important aussi, insister qu'un un collaborateur africain publie un livre, je vais le montrer, vous pouvez, si vous voulez le chercher, ça c'est très important, parce que finalement, regardez le livre, et donc c'est un livre d'une collection particulièrement importante qui s'appelle Archives, et donc c'est monsieur Couy qui a fait ce travail. D'autre part, on voulait dire aussi, j'arrête la vidéo pour regarder mon texte rapidement, et donc, ce qui est bon, il y avait aussi mon point de vue sur l'Afrique, ma connaissance du pays et ma lecture. Bon, ça serait pour une autre fois, mais simplement évoquer dans la deuxième partie de notre projet, nous voulions parler des croisements littéraires et culturels dont on a déjà entendu parler quelque chose. Il y avait deux parties, et donc ces deux parties de notre dialogue traitaient les sujets suivants. Le premier sujet, c'était les écrivains des deux rives, c'est-à-dire de quelle manière les écrivains latino-américains étaient perçus et l'influence de ces écrivains sur la littérature africaine. Et donc, évidemment, vous avez déjà parlé d'un certain nombre d'auteurs, mais on voulait parler essentiellement sur Rulfo, sur Garcia Marquez et Carpentier. On voulait parler aussi de ce qui est le réalisme magique, qu'on n'aime pas beaucoup, parce que ça, c'est une sorte de tiroir où on fout tout, c'est-à-dire tout ce qu'on ne peut pas classer, parfois, on les met dans, ah oui, c'est du réalisme magique. Mais réfléchir sur la question de ce qui est magique. Et là, ça, c'est un autre débat, c'est-à-dire les concepts de magique qui existent et qui perdurent en Afrique et dans les pays aussi de l'Amérique latine. Et on allait voir aussi, parce que même par exemple, des écrivains africains, l'Afrique, c'est quoi? C'est l'Afrique noire, mais évidemment, l'Afrique, c'est aussi les Maghreb, l'Afrique, c'est aussi pas mal les pays où nous savons en particulier des écrivains portugais ou des langues portugaises qui ont ressenti et ils sont reçus une influence de Rulfo, par exemple, et je pense à Couto, un écrivain assez connu. Donc, notre deuxième point qu'on allait traiter, c'était les pouvoirs langue-culture, et en particulier la question de rapport des pays africains et d'Amérique latine. Et donc, ça, il fallait dire aussi que c'est très important de penser à deux choses, c'est-à-dire il y a des langues qui sont restées, les langues des colonisateurs, qui existent aujourd'hui toujours dans les pays de l'Afrique, et en particulier les Côte d'Ivoire. C'est très important parce que c'est un pays où le français est une langue officielle, mais il y a toutes les autres langues de toutes les autres ethnies qui sont des langues très importantes. Et là, M. Couy aurait pu parler de ça. D'autre part, au Mexique, ou Colombie, mais parlons au Mexique, il y a l'espagnol évidemment, mais à la présence de toutes les langues andiennes et la culture qui existe. Et on voulait établir des liens entre ces deux points. Il faut évidemment penser à d'autres choses, c'est-à-dire l'écriture. Et vous savez que moi, je suis extrêmement attaché au concept de pluralité, l'écriture plurielle, et je voulais développer avec lui aussi cette idée, c'est-à-dire la diversité et la pluralité qui existent des deux côtés, c'est-à-dire d'un côté l'Afrique et l'autre côté c'est l'Amérique latine. Et donc voilà, donc examiner cette richesse et cette pluralité à partir d'un certain nombre d'axes que je voulais énoncer. Simplement conclure, nous aurions voulu donner une image panoramique de la littérature et de la richesse continentale en Amérique latine comme en Afrique. Un projet aussi, et j'avais élaboré, si vous voulez, j'ai passé 2 semaines à lire et relire et à établir une bibliographie d'un certain nombre d'auteurs qui me semblent essentiels, disons des auteurs africains, pas uniquement des langues françaises ou espagnoles ou portugaises, mais aussi des écrivains en langue anglaise. Et pour terminer, je sais que vous allez présenter, disons, l'œuvre d'un écrivain qui s'appelle Monsieur Jacques. Et donc, j'ai lu son roman, Le fil de Mexico, et donc c'est particulièrement intéressant ces romans. Mais moi, je voudrais lui poser une question, simplement, quelle est la différence de son point de vue, lui, comme Africain qui écrit en français, par rapport à d'autres lectures, disons, des gens, des Européens, et là, je parle des Européens qui, par exemple, ici, il y a des Allemands, il y a des Français et il y a d'autres pays du monde. Et donc, quelle est la différence et la particularité? Où est-ce qu'elle se rapproche le point de vue disons, des Européens? Et là, ça m'intéresse parce que c'est essentiel de montrer qu'il y a un point de vue africain pour traiter, et là en particulier, le cas des filles de Mexico et en particulier de la prostitution à Mexico. Bon, voilà, je ne voudrais pas non plus exagérer parce que ça fait déjà 8 minutes que je parle et donc c'était un résumé, c'est peut-être trop, simplement pour vous féliciter et peut-être à une autre occasion, on aura l'occasion de se voir. Merci beaucoup.
Merci beaucoup, professeur Ramos Izquierdo, de votre participation. Je ne sais pas s'il y a quelqu'un qui vous pose une question, le professeur Ramos Izquierdo. Nous avons quelques minutes. O de la literatura latinoamericana aussi, la relación de Rulfo, García Márquez, la cuestión de Fantón, comme Luna avait déjà mentionné.
Je me demande si on peut éventuellement essayer vendredi à la fin du colloque, si on peut avoir la connexion et peut-être
Oui,
avoir les deux, même s'il sera un peu tard dans la journée,
oui.
mais c'est tellement dommage de rater cette occasion.
On
Mais aujourd'hui,
oui,
on est tellement coincé dans le temps qu'on ne peut pas réessayer le soir, mais on pourra peut-être vendredi.
Vous sera une possibilité, peut-être.
Ouais, et puis, on peut pas aussi essayer avec la connexion et tout. Donc,
Oui.
c'est ce que je propose. Non?
Oui, bien sûr,
Ouais.
je pense que sera une bonne solution. Et voilà, je pense parce que sera
Le
très
problème avec
intéressant.
Abidjan, c'est que la météo, enfin, l'agence a annoncé qu'aujourd'hui, il aurait une forte pluie avec inondation et tout. Donc, en principe, la connexion Internet est impossible. J'ai même essayé plus tard, j'ai le doute que ça marche.
Ok.
C'est plutôt mieux de
Ok,
prévoir.
donc, mais vendredi, il y a des chances que...
Ok,
Sinon, mercredi au jeudi, qu'il y ait des averses avec des inondations. Ils ont même demandé aux gens de prendre toutes les précautions possibles. Voilà.
Et elle est où?
Monsieur Rosa.
Comunicarle a Israël.
Ok, voilà, je pense que on peut finaliser cette petite panel. Et voilà, merci beaucoup.
Ok. Ok. Donc, vous allez gérer la situation? Ouais. Donc, si elle n'est pas là,
Oui.
Ok, oui, je ne sais pas, je pense que je ne sais pas si Esteban est ici. Je vais parler avec Esteban. Oui, on peut avoir
Donc, normalement, dans le programme, il est prévu une intervention de Mario Zabounemourin qui n'a pas pu voyager déjà et qui espérait se connecter et présenter à distance. Mais elle a eu un problème cardiaque, donc elle n'a pas pu voyager déjà, elle a dû annuler son voyage et elle espérait présenter en ligne. Mais elle m'a encore écrit pour me dire que ce n'était pas possible. Donc, ce que nous allons faire, donc, c'est des imprévus, c'est des choses qu'on ne prévoit pas. Donc, ce que nous allons faire, c'est prendre 5 minutes pour boire
15 minutes.
15 minutes,
peut-être
voilà.
pour une pause
15
café.
minutes pour prendre du café, du thé, et après on revient pour écouter Nicolas Spinter.
the history department of the University of São Paulo. He holds a PhD in history from the University.
Of my argument, and it's that the late introduction of the Spanish Empire into, in some way, the massive slave trade in the Caribbean, right? So we have like the main players in the slave trade. Good. The slave trade in the 16th, 17th, and the first half of the 18th century were England and France. And of course, there was a slavery in the Spanish territories, but there was not like this massive introduction of enslaved population that were coming from Africa. And actually, this expansion was even bigger in the late 18th century and throughout the entire 19th century, especially in Cuba. And one of the main events that helped to this increase or this boost of the slave trade in the Spanish Empire was the Haitian Revolution.
Sorry.
No, it's okay. Stop. Sure.
Ich komme da, das ist immer, ich komme da oben immer nicht rein, wenn es hier ist. Ja. Sorry, ich komme da anders nicht rein. So, Bildschirmpräsentation. Ich starte die eigentlich, bevor ich das teile. So, und dann, so, jetzt sind wir da. Jetzt ist er aber nicht geteilt. Freigeben. Und wir sind jetzt hier drauf, weil sonst ändert sich die Folie nicht. Also hier drauf. Also bleibt doch immer auf der, man muss es hier machen. Nee, also. Aber sonst gehen die Slides nicht weiter. Manchmal ist es auch einfach nur, wenn man es neu macht. So. Das war, weil die war ja vorhin auch nicht richtig geteilt. Okay. Also ich hoffe, dass es jetzt geht. So, okay.
Now we're good?
Yeah.
Okay. No, thank you. Sorry. All right, so I'm just going to talk. So I was talking about the Haitian Revolution and the decline of the plantation economy in Saint-Domingue because of the revolution, of course. And that was like a opportunity, you know, that's how Cuban planters envisioned this as an opportunity to increase the plantation economy in Cuba. And actually the Spanish Empire was also interested in increase the slave trade for two reasons: this decline of mining economies in the continent, and also the interest in attracting people of color and Black people from Africa in order to increase the militias in the Spanish Empire, the Black militias in the Spanish Empire, that, for instance, they play a key role, and this is the work of Elena Schneider. They play a key role in the battle against the British troops in the invasion of Havana in 1762. So they saw like some kind of military advantage, and at the same time, like the boost of plantation economies in the Caribbean, right? So the development of this strategy was strengthened by the Spanish-American revolutions. Why? First of all, because the Spanish-American revolutions weakened the slavery system in the continent. The war so encouraged people of color and enslaved people to join the armies of the revolutionaries and the royalists in order to gain their freedoms. So that is the word of Peter Blanchard, weakened the system. And the second was the discussion about citizenship for free people of color and pardos in the Cortes of Cádiz, right? That it was this idea of give citizenship to them, that it was opposed by Cuban planters, right? So it was like those two challenges. So within the context, some people start to leave the continent because of the war, and several of them start to arrive into Cuba and Puerto Rico, but especially to Puerto Rico, sorry. In the case of Cuba, what we have in the 1810s is the distrust of colonial authorities to the influx of enslaved populations, because they couldn't control who was entering into the island, and what were like the conditions of the sales of enslaved populations in places such as Portobelo and Cartagena, right? The war in some way just create a chaos in the market, on the slave market in these cities, and authorities in the Caribbean, they didn't know how these transactions were made, what enslaved people were arriving into the islands, and at the same time they start to begin to be afraid of what they call as revolutionary contamination of the enslaved populations, right? They were witnessing the revolution, and it's like, okay, they are seeing what is happening there, and maybe they can introduce this kind of ideas into our territories. That was what happened in Cuba. In Puerto Rico was completely different, because in Puerto Rico, there was the 1815 cedula, that it was a policy created by the Spanish Empire in order to liberalize the economy of the island, and actually to boost also the slave trade. So Puerto Rican authorities were more interested in receiving immigrants from the continent, and also receiving immigrants who were bringing enslaved population into the islands. But there was the cases here are small ones, there is not a lot of people, but at the same time, most of the enslaved population that I have seen in the archive that were arriving into Puerto Rico were household slaves or women who were helping Spanish women raising kids. You know, it was just like this kind of 2, 3, 5 small introductions of enslaved populations into Cuba and Puerto Rico. But Puerto Rican authorities were more willing to accept these introductions, because they perceived them as good for their economies, right? So this is the 1810s. In the 1820s, the scenario changed completely. Why? Because with the defeat of the royalist troops in the American continent, thousands of immigrants start to arrive into the Spanish Caribbean, especially into Cuba and Puerto Rico. And colonial authorities start to believe or envision these immigrants as or a threat to the political system or as possible assets to the colonial system. Why? Because they were bringing, in some cases, capitals, and they were bringing also enslaved populations into the islands. So we have the development of a policy that has been studied by Puerto Rican historians called the license regime, that it was created by Miguel de la Torre y Pando, who is here, and Jose Domingo Diaz. One thing that is really interesting about these two guys is that they were emigres themselves. Jose Domingo Diaz perhaps was one of the most important royalists in Venezuela, and he was Venezuelan, and he was Pardo. And Miguel de la Torre y Pando was the second in command of the expeditionary army of the Spanish Empire that was led by General Pablo Morillo. And after he left Venezuela, he went to Puerto Rico, and he became the Captain General of Puerto Rico between 1822 and 1837. So what they developed was this regime in which they were giving farmers and immigrants permits to introduce enslaved populations from the continent, but especially from the Eastern Caribbean islands, Curaçao, Saint Thomas, Saint Bartholomew, Saint Thomas were the most important one. And what we have here is the alliance of Puerto Rican slavers and immigrants with Dutch, Danish, Portuguese, and French counterparts, French traders too, to bring enslaved populations, both from Africa, but also from the Caribbean islands that I mentioned before. One thing that is really important here is that the British authorities opposed to this introduction because of the 1817 treaty signed by Spain and Great Britain to stop the slave trade in the Spanish Empire, north of the Ecuador, and one moment I forget the date exactly, and then to halt it completely. But Torrey-Pando and emigres and farmers in Puerto Rico used this loophole of the cedula that I was mentioned to you before in order to introduce enslaved populations, because even though there was this treaty signed by the British and Spain in order to stop the slave trade, the 1850 cedula encouraged and promoted the introduction of enslaved populations from the continent and from the Eastern Caribbean islands. So it's the use of these legal hooflaws that allowed the introduction of thousands of slaves into Puerto Rico. And there are like two things that start to concern Puerto Rican authorities. First of all, how to control this in the financial terms. Why? Because they were really interested in the taxes that they were collecting because of the introduction of the enslaved population in order to improve the economy of the treasury of the island. And second, how to control the introduction of these enslaved people into Puerto Rico. So here, I just want to enter into the third part, and it's that immigrants, people who were coming from the continent, start to apply to these licenses as well. And why this is important? Because when they were leaving the continent and they start moving into islands such as Curaçao, Saint Thomas, Puerto Rico, they create these networks of associates who help them to transport and introduce the enslaved people from these islands into Puerto Rico. So they start to apply to these permits to introduce small cargoes of enslaved populations, like maybe 15 people, to huge introductions of 500 people. It was just this kind of really massive trade in some cases. And the other thing was that the Spanish Empire was interested that these immigrants could move their assets and properties from the continent into the Spanish Caribbean, not only to strengthen the imperial project in the Spanish imperial project, but also to weaken the Republican project. So they also were interested in giving these permits to allow the introduction from enslaved people from the continent. But the problem here was, again, what I told you before, what they believed were the contaminated enslaved populations. And they were really, really concerned about the introduction of enslaved people with, as they say, revolutionary maxims. And actually, their interest was how to control the entrance of these people in order to protect the system. This is, I think, for me, the most important thing. Is the important point for them is protect the slavery system. This creates a lot of problems between central authorities of the island in Puerto Rico and local authorities of the island, because local authorities want to enforce the prohibition of the entrance of people from the continent, and the central authorities were like all the time saying, no, we should allow this introduction, right? But it creates this kind of really administrative problems, and enslaved population is staying in jail, for instance, for 1, 2, 3, 4 months, waiting for a decision of the case, So it creates also this kind of problems, the development of these policies to allow the introduction of enslaved population that belong to immigrants. But the other thing that I want to highlight, and I'm just saying that I'm running out of time, and it's the immigrants, when they were arriving into the islands, some of the cases that I'm not citing here, they start to ask, for instance, for financial help to the Spanish authorities, delayed wages in the case of bureaucrats, support militaries, They were all the time trying to get some assistance. And one of the arguments of immigrants in order to justify the introduction of enslaved population to the Spanish Caribbean was that it was a reward for the loyalty to the crown. The crown should allow the introduction of these enslaved populations because we were loyal, and this is a reward for us. And it's also good for the plantation economy of the islands. So that's basically one of the main arguments that they are pursuing. And just to finish, this kind of dynamic that I just mentioned to you creates certain ambivalences, especially in Spanish commissioners and Spanish spies that were located in islands such as Curacao and Saint Thomas, that they start in especially in the 1830s, and I think that this date is really important because it's the beginning, not the beginning, but it was the moment in which the British Empire the abolition was 1833, I think, if I am not wrong. So that moment was close, and they knew that in the Spanish islands. So, and the other part is the decline of the slave market in places such as Curacao. And Spanish spies and commissioners in islands such as the above mentioned start to send warnings to Spanish authorities in Cuba and Puerto Rico to let them know about the introduction, the smuggling of enslaved populations from these islands that, of course, they consider dangerous, and the necessity to ban the introduction of Black people from foreign countries and the continent in the early 1830s. But what happened with this was the creation of schemes by local authorities and immigrants in the Caribbean to continue with the trade. you know, so it was like these massive schemes of corruption, basically, to introduce enslaved populations into Cuba and Puerto Rico. One of the guys who were more aware of this was this Jose Maria Pando, that was the Spanish spy in Curacao, and he was also the cousin of Miguel de la Torre Pando, the general captain of Puerto Rico. But for me, and this is, well, I'm almost done. For me, what is most interesting about this guy, two things. The warnings that he sent became policies in Cuba and Puerto Rico to ban the introduction of enslaved populations from Curacao, from Jamaica. And when the captain generals gave the arguments, are basically citing this guy. So it's a guy who is important. But a couple of years later, he became a slave trader himself for a couple of years, because he took advantage of the license permit created by his cousin to get unlimited permit to introduce enslaved populations into Cuba, into Puerto Rico. And actually, he was really successful for a couple of years sending shipments to the island. But the decline in the slave market in Curacao quickly destroyed his enterprise as an enslaved trader. So the conclusions. First of all, just to highlight, because this is nothing new, the first conclusion, but it's just to recap. The Spanish-American revolutions weakened the slavery system in the continent at the same time that it helped to consolidate the growth of plantation economy. And I didn't talk about this concept, second slavery in the Caribbean. The second one, the interest to bring exiles encourage Spanish authorities to open, even though cautiously, the door to the entrance of enslaved people by these immigrants, and to establish policies that facilitate the entrance policies that help to facilitate and control the entrance of enslaved people from the continent and the Caribbean islands. And the last one is that despite the concerns of the Spanish authorities that I mentioned to you, immigrants successfully appealed to their status as exiles, as loyal exiles, to get permits to introduce enslaved people and expand the inter-Caribbean traffic that helped consolidate the plantation economy in the Spanish Caribbean. 25 minutes while I was. Thank you. So please, any questions? English, Spanish, I don't speak French, so sorry about that. Or Portuguese I can speak in Portuguese. And thank you. Yeah, sure.
It was really clear to me, but I want to know a little bit more about the methodology and the references that you used in your presentation, because I'm really ignorant about how it was this process of the second introduction of slavery. And the first is about the reference, if other historians are working with the archives or how it is this process. And the second one is if there's also a possibility of work with oral or testimonies or oral memory or another kind of research. I don't know if everything is there just in the archive or if it's possible. Because we're in this transatlantic dialogue. These two.
Let me just grab a pen just to write. I have to answer it first, or are we going to collect, or how it's? Gracias.
Any other questions?
Una duda, no sé si esta segunda esclavitud tiene algo que ver con el futbolero de 1780, que permitió, ¿no?, a los españoles introducir legos en Cuba y en Puerto Rico. No sé si hay algún vínculo entre este código, que al mismo tiempo lo permitía un matrimonio entre esclavos, aliviar, ¿no?, las condiciones, y, ¿no?, el hecho de hacer, ¿no?, esta segunda, entre comillas,
Ajá.
esclavitud.
Yes. Entonces, a ver, puedo responder esas dos. So I'm going to answer the first one. Well, what for me has been really interesting is that the cases, like, of course, like historians such as, so there are two things. First, I guess that different kinds of historiography, right? So the first one is the role of different immigrants to expand or to introduce enslaved populations into their respective into different colonies after different revolutions. So we have the case, for instance, of the Ada Ferrer, who studied how French immigrants from Saint-Domingue play a key role in the expansion of plantation economy, especially coffee and sugar in the eastern part of Cuba after the Haitian Revolution. And we have also the work here of Thomas Mayet, but is also a postdoc here in Tübingen, who is working something similar, but in the case of the Havana area, also the Haitian Revolution. And so we have that, and we have also the cases of Maya Yazanov with the British Empire and Jamaica, Barbados, Bahamas. And probably one of the most important cases, the Ashley White and the expansion of slavery in New Orleans and Louisiana after the Haitian Revolution. Again, people who play a key role in this were exiles from the Haitian Revolution arriving into the city. In the case of the Spanish Empire, at least I have seen like the development of slavery more related, and of course it was related to this, I can't deny this, was like to the Haitian Revolution, right? So we have how the Haitian Revolution helped to expand plantation economy and to consolidate colonial rule in the Caribbean. But then I realized that there is not a lot of things about how the Spanish American revolutions play also a key role. And I think that this is like what I want to highlight. And one of the points is that most of the historiographies, like in the case of Puerto Rico, just focus on Puerto Rico, you know, or some cases in Cuba, at least the historiography that I know. Probably, if you know other cases, that would be great. But yes. So and for instance, this case of the license permit that Puerto Rican historians have studied that since the 70s, basically. We have the case of Arturo Morales Carrion. It's the one that I remember right now. But I just realized, sometimes I picture that what helps me studying immigrants is that helps me to connect the two islands and breaking like this national separation between Cuba and Puerto Rico, you know. And I think that the case of Pando, for instance, is key because he, in the Puerto Rican historiography, he's mentioned a lot because he was the cousin of Torre Pando, but he was also in contact a lot with Cuban authorities. And this is not that well studied, at least from what I know. And we have the case of second slavery. And I think that this is the other thing that I need to delve actually even more. And it's the development of pro-slavery policies in the Spanish Empire. And we have, I think that for me, the most important, or the two historians that I know more, it's one is Christopher Schmidt Novara, that he actually wrote an amazing paper some years ago. Unfortunately, he passed away. about how the Spanish American Revolution help immigrants to craft discourses, pro-slavery discourses, right? And basically the argument is that revolution creates so much chaos that of course is going to destroy every slavery system. And this is what some immigrants witness in the continent, and they are also trying to warn the Spanish authorities about this. And the other are Brazilians, Rafael Marquese, Tamis Parron, and Marcia Bebel, who also work about politics of slavery in the Spanish Empire, and especially how it became a political cornerstone, sorry, of the imperial project in the 19th century. So yeah, and the methodologies. This is a really interesting question because actually I was presenting the paper recently to the same thing that I present to you, to my group here, and they were asking me about if there is, in the case of the British Empire, we have sources of enslaved people actually going there, voices of them. And they were asking me, have you ever find that? And it was no, unfortunately, no. Unfortunately, I haven't. Probably in local archives in Puerto Rico and Cuba, in church archives, parroquias, forget so the word in English. You can find that kind of things, but unfortunately, when I went to Cuba and I went to Puerto Rico, I couldn't find that. And so it's in some way, I'm really unfortunate because at the end, what this is about is a story of colonial officers and traders and immigrants, and not the voices of enslaved populations. And actually, I remember that when I was starting doing this project, sometimes I talk about immigrants and enslaved population, and then I was like, no, really, because they were not. I'm probably in most of the cases, they didn't take they didn't. It was not their decision.
They didn't volunteer.
Yes, it was not volunteered. I'm going there. Yeah. Probably was the case of free people of color, yes, especially in the case of Cuba, but not in this case. And oral method, wow, this is, I was talking before over here, I was a little bit scared about not scared, it was a joke, I'm not scared about. Yeah, because of like this is in some way a really traditional history, like archive related, and I don't know how to, and if you have any clue how to do this, it would be great, but I have no idea how to do oral histories, and how even to contact or how to establish like yes, any kind of framework to do this. So if you have any clue or any advice, it's more than welcome. Really. And in the case of the other question, I'm going to answer that in Spanish because you answer in Spanish. Sí, está completamente relacionado, ¿no? Está totalmente relacionado porque lo que yo veo acá, y yo creo que si no lo ve como en una escala muy grande, temporal, bueno, no muy grande temporal, pero un poco más. Lo que tú mencionaste, la orden o la liberalización que tú mencionaste, 1780 y, sí, 80 y eso, fue parte integral de este nuevo proyecto del Imperio Español. Que sí, que lo que pues autores como Del Talmage o Rafael Marqués han llamado como este comienzo de una segunda esclavitud, ¿no? Que es esta liberalización de la trata de esclavos en territorios como Cuba, después en Brasil, que permitieron, por lo menos en estos territorios, una llegada tan grande de esclavos que no había pasado antes. Hay una cosa muy, muy, muy impresionante para mí, y yo imagino que muchos de ustedes lo saben, es este website de Slave Voyages. ¿Lo han escuchado? Hay un website que tiene como las bases de datos de la introducción, register, ¿no? Registradas de poblaciones esclavizadas en todas las Américas, desde el siglo XVI, si no estoy mal, hasta el siglo XIX. Y están todas las entradas, los barcos, cuántas personas entraron, los capitanes, bueno, es una cosa, una base de datos impresionante. Y hay una parte en la cual tú puedes hacer como una especie de un video, puedes hacer play y te hace como un recorrido de las diferentes introducciones a partir de en el tiempo. Y es muy obvio como en la primera parte la mayoría de las introducciones fueron destinadas hacia Jamaica, Barbados, no todo el British Caribbean, basically, right? Y Francia. Y como después de esta época que tú hablas, ¡pum!, cambia totalmente y las líneas se van es para Cuba y se van para Brasil sobre todo, para Cuba, Brasil. Y lo que me parece más interesante eh, es que, claro, fue todo un plan orquestado por el lobby gigantesco que hicieron los plantadores cubanos, sobre todo en Madrid, para cambiar la economía política de la isla e intentar al mismo tiempo cambiar la economía política de todo el imperio. Y esto es una cosa que Jeremy Edelman ha trabajado también, y esto ya es una cosa contrafactual. ¿Qué habría pasado con el imperio español si no hubiera habido guerras de independencia? Porque había un plan muy grande para cambiar la política económica del imperio hacia la esclavitud. Eh, y esto no solamente en la parte del Caribe, sino también en la parte del Río de la Plata, en el sur. Entonces, y lo que uno puede ver en el caso sobre todo de Cuba en el siglo XIX es que ya después de, es decir, ya toda la mentalidad imperial estuvo casi que dirigida a mantener ese sistema, tanto por parte de las élites locales como por parte de las autoridades en Madrid, ¿no? Por eso también es muy importante cuando en 1836 las Cortes de Cádiz eh, deciden excluir a las colonias Cuba, Puerto Rico y Filipinas de cualquier representación política y volverlas como territorios especiales con leyes especiales. ¿Y cuál era la razón principal de esto? Lo que ellos llamaban como la presencia de poblaciones heterogéneas y sobre todo de poblaciones negras, ¿no? Entonces, ¿por qué la península sí podía tener un sistema constitucional donde todos fueran iguales? Porque todos eran blancos. ¿Acaso en las colonias? No, ¿no? Entonces, lo que tú dices es el comienzo, una de las funding, una de las piedras angulares de ese proyecto que se desarrolla hasta finales del siglo XIX. English, Spanish.
We'll close and close.
Ah, hay una más. Thank you.
But then, I think later, my question is mostly regarding to the legal regimes that are in place in the, so, in this region, which is the once Spanish American colony after the abolition of slavery. What happens to the once enslaved population in terms of in terms of the legal regimes, like where there's different legal regimes that were in place in order to administer this population that now remains in the once colony, or are there a form of asymmetric federalism or a different form of administration legal regimes to also cater to their interests?
No. But you are talking about the Spanish American, the former colonies.
Yes.
So what were the big republics later? Okay. This is okay. So we have during and after the revolution. This is not the topic in which I am the expert, but what we have there is this gradual path into abolition, right? In different republics. In the 1820s, some republics, for instance, Colombia, they implement or they create these free one policies. And the abolition of slavery in Colombia was 1853, 50 something.
Maybe 48.
Mexico, we have 1829, and we have like different countries going into, but at the same time, in some way, they were going into a same direction, and it also depends on how powerful were the slaveholding classes in each one of these countries. For instance, the case that I know more is Colombia and the slaveholding classes of the Cauca region. Where is today Popayán, Cali, they were powerful enough to block this for a time. But that was not the case, for instance, in Mexico, in which the slavery system was in some way weaker and with less, in this case, Afro-Mexican populations. And we have like this kind of these republics going for this idea of legal equality under the law. But of course, one thing is the legal and this kind of things, and of course, other thing are what is happening on the ground. And from what I know, I can say that there is this legal framework that is equal for everybody, but of course there was a lot of discrimination. It was free people of color, but at the same time, and this is one of the things that the historiography have been talking about that recently, it's the mobility and the upward mobility of some of these populations, especially caused by the war. Because a lot of these people were able to be part of the armies. They became officials, some of them became politicians. I'm not gonna say that a huge thing, but some people were able actually to move upwards socially. And there was like this kind of more flexible, but it's weird because like the Spanish Empire in some way with the militias and especially of free people of color, there was also some kind of outward limited mobility for these populations. Now, I'm not going to say that they were able to, but there was certain kind of, especially from free people of course, enslaved populations was completely different. So what I can say is like a gradual path to abolition in which it's different in each country according to the power of the slaveholding elites. And the other one is legal equality under the law, and the other one is certain way upward mobility for some free people of color population, not all of them. That's all.
I think we will close because we have another quite.
We have to go to
the.
Thank you.
Nicolas, stay here in Tübingen 4 or 5 months.
5 months.
Okay.
And, time to Thank you very much. Thank you. For this stimulating presentation. To put this problems in. No me dejaron hablar. Gracias, hombre.
Yeah, so really, thank you very much. And just to let you know, so we will have, we can eat everything which is left. We have, the event at the Institut Culturel Français at 7 o'clock. And well, it's a 20 minutes walk from here, so I think we should leave at about 6:30.
Just get up.
And everyone is invited to this event, which will take place. Sami Chak will read from his novel, which has freshly been translated into German. Le continent du fruit et du Pacifique. This event will take place in French and in German. And you are invited afterwards probably to vers de l'amitié par l'Institut culturel franco-allemand. And the participants of the conference, les intervenants sont invités après aussi to a conference dinner. But as we will eat late, may just have something to continue.